Hello and welcome to another edition of The Tigers Down Under. I'm your host, as always, Alex, and with me I have Brad.
Good evening, everyone.
Oh, yeah, it's a good evening, but it hasn't been a good 7 days as a City supporter. A couple of poor results. We were sitting here this time last week, Dan and myself, hoping for 2 wins to really sort of get us jumping back up the table, and it looked that way to start with in the Reading game, but wasn't to be, with just a draw out of that game, and then obviously a pretty poor loss to Preston that we'll talk about in a second. We'll start with the Reading game though, and Brad, it was great to see Campbell back on the score sheet. It's been a fair while since he was on the score sheet for City, and there's a great stat that we've never actually lost a game he's scored in, so here's hoping he can score a few more this season.
Yeah, well, we definitely need to. It was an awesome ball from Larson, and the way Campbell not only positioned himself but read it was magnificent, and the finish was equally as good. So it was good to see that although he's put in good shifts this year, that looked like he has not lost any of that touch in front of goal anyway.
Yeah, some great composure from Campbell. And the player you mentioned there in Larson, who probably had his best game in the City shirt, to be honest. I mean, he hit the post with a pretty decently hit free kick, and there was another one, I think, that the Reading keeper, Manoni, sort of spilled onto the line and it was kind of cleared away, but looking a lot more dangerous with those free kicks than he has in the past.
Yeah, look, he did, and obviously that's sort of what he's there for. I thought, look, he didn't have to do a lot during the game. I think he spent a fair bit of time just on the ball and moving the ball around, but certainly sort of at set pieces, and obviously when he had the ability to run in towards the defence, that's obviously when he likes opening them up, and he had a pretty good game.
And it was obviously great to see Irvine getting a start for City, and we've sort of been calling out for the last couple of weeks to see him get a game, especially with Myler as defensive mids, and we looked a lot more assured than I would say we have in the past, with Larson and Henriksen as our centre mids, so I thought that was a step in the right direction.
Yeah, look, obviously from us patriotic types over here, we're pretty happy to see Irvine playing, and I don't think he had a great game. He didn't really get himself involved a lot, but nonetheless, he was involved, which is a good start.
Yeah, it's always a good start. I guess on the more concerning side of things, Kingsley really doesn't seem to have come on at all. I mean, we've been saying for a little while now that he hasn't really settled in too well, but we sort of hoped that he'd get going. And unfortunately, I think he's suffered a pretty serious injury against Preston. I don't know what the extent of that one is, but at least on a footballing side of things, he hasn't really set the world alight at that left-back position.
No, look, he hasn't. And what we do there, I don't really know. He doesn't look like he's really understanding maybe the way he should be playing. Certainly if we're sort of lining up with 3 at the back, we know that he's got to be more of that progressive left back than just trying to tuck in and defend. But and look, it's a bit hard. We've been a bit spoiled that Robertson was certainly a player that could get up and back pretty well. But I think it could be that Kingsley's one of these players that if we are actually playing a flat back 4, he could really probably settle in okay. But he does seem to be a bit lost in this back 3 setup.
Well, just on that, obviously we conceded the equaliser against Reading, and we really seem to be struggling to hold on to leads at the moment. And I guess it comes back to perhaps whether it's our formation, whether it's our philosophy at the moment, I'm not sure. But you touched on there perhaps moving to a back 4 versus a back 3. What's your take on the formation at the moment, and how we'd sort of be able to get the best out of the players we have?
Well, look, based on the results this week, it probably wouldn't help if we're playing a back 5. But I think, I don't know, Slutsky's, he's had a bit of time to try and get this gelled setup together, but the one thing I sort of say is it's all right playing a back 3 if you've got 3 outstanding centre halves and fullbacks that, well, let's say wing backs that can really add something down both wings and obviously get back. And whether it's the opposition or the quality of the squad that we've actually got, I just feel like playing 3 at the back helps our central defenders, but I don't know how well it helps the rest of us up the pitch. And maybe if we had sort of really brutal left and right wing back that really overlap well and sort of run that Elmo role like he used to. You're getting the ball in more, so therefore you're actually not having to get back as much. But we obviously seem to be on the back foot a lot. And let's face it, I think that's the second goal in 3 weeks or 2 weeks now that they've pretty much caught us almost napping. And I wonder sometimes whether that's because you've got a back three and guys are too busy worrying about what's up the pitch.
The other concerning element, I guess, of that back three at the moment is the really big dip in form that we've seen from Michael Hector, who, when he started the season, we were all sort of calling for him to be made permanent almost immediately because he'd had such a fantastic start for us. But particularly against Sunderland and lesser so against Reading, he's really sort of starting to show his flaws and issues with his game.
Yeah, look, and it was a bit of a concern, considering as well, I mean, let's face it, Reading aren't setting the world on fire themselves. And you would have thought, whilst, Reading away is not exactly the easiest trip to make, you would think that with the form they've been in also, that this would be a game for a centre-half to really command and stand up. And I felt it was lacking a lot. I think he probably, when he first came in, I think he actually probably enjoyed the fact that it was all new and shiny. But if you remember, we didn't quite have our formation set. Yeah. We didn't really have a dedicated left back. And maybe it was more along the lines of he knew what our flaws were. And maybe he's a bit guilty of going into a game on last weekend, considering that we're playing Reading, that he was probably filled with a bit more confidence than normal that this might be a bit easier.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and I don't know what the solution is, whether it's to bring in Mazouk instead of him. I mean, at least we've got a couple of options at centre-back now, as opposed to at the start of the season when we just had Dawson and Mazouk and didn't really know what we were going to do in terms of line-up. At least we've got a bit of flexibility there, but it almost feels like our issue lately has been that sort of chopping and changing. So as much as we want to sort of drop players or change the team around to improve the formation or the personnel, that's almost sort of shooting ourselves in the foot to an extent, because at this stage it almost feels like we just need to be able to name a settled 11, get them to gel, get them to understand each other, and as much as we want to sort of be changing the personnel around to respond to players losing form or attitudes or whatever it is, it almost seems to be counterintuitive at the moment, or counterproductive at the moment.
Yeah, look, it does, and I mean, that's the whole welcome to the championship, really, isn't it? You're going to be playing these, midweek games all the time, or Tuesday night games all the time, and it's going to take quite a while, I think, for these guys to really get settled. And it goes back to what we were hearing early doors, where if you can't get your squad sorted pretty quickly at the start of the window, or at least have the core of it done, you're going to struggle till the back half of the year and back half of the season. And, I mean, look, from Slutsky's point of view, not only has he got to try and work out what formation to play, he's actually trying to work out the division we're in to some extent as well. And certainly, whether it's all fact or fiction, we know that he hasn't picked every player that's come in. Certainly, I thought the lineup against Reading seemed to suit the players we had on the park. But, gee whiz, even with 10, 15 minutes to go, I was getting bloody nervous at the way we were defending. And that's probably what we've seen now in a couple of weeks, a couple of games in a row. We've seen that defensive issue coming up and effectively ruining the way our midfield is trying to play the ball as well.
Yeah, and those defensive issues were on display again against Preston, and it really sort of compounded our pretty glum week. Seen in the press, I think it was Myler and maybe even Dawson sort of targeting those 2 wins in a row at home against both Preston and Birmingham, and it got off to a pretty rotten start with the performance against Preston that it was just frankly shocking. And we sort of talked last week briefly about the prospect of a relegation battle and didn't want to dip our heads too much into pessimistic outlooks, but the way we played against Preston, especially in the first half, really sort of doesn't fill you with much confidence at all. And you have to acknowledge as well, I mean, Preston are going very well at the moment. I think they're in the top 6 and they look a very composed team. And I guess that's sort of the biggest factor in this, is people look at the Preston team and on paper compare them player to player and say, well, their players aren't as skillful or as experienced or as good as ours. But as a squad, as a team, I think their chemistry, their understanding, their knowledge, they have their game plan, everything about them, every aspect of how they're playing, just outranks everything that we're doing, and it was really shown up, especially in that first half. But even the fact that they were so willing and had so much desire to press on right until the final whistle and got them that late winner, just sort of highlights that.
Look, you hit it the nail on the head, mate. They're a unit that plays tight together, knows what their jobs are, and they're cohesive. And you only have to take a step back to our last promotion season when that squad was well gelled, well assembled, played a huge amount of games together in the back half of the season with a very similar lineup, and they got that sort of uncanny sense of where to be and where guys want the ball. I mean, some of the passing on the weekend in that first half, I mean, what we were thinking. I mean, even if you're scared, pump it long and get us some time to get back behind the ball. But we were just horrible. We really were horrible. And we were playing as if we were playing at a mix and match five-a-side, pop in and have a 10-minute run type game. It was like we don't even train together.
Yeah. At least on the positive side, on the silver lining of the game, it was great to see Bowen get another goal. And it was interesting to see when Grzycki came on, he'd clearly apparently been hampered by a bit of an injury, which is why he didn't play against Reading. But when he came on in the second half against Preston, he sort of sparked us to life a little bit. He was obviously the catalyst for Bowen's goal with his free kick into the area. And I think he also hit the crossbar a bit later in the match. So he really sort of got us going. And say what you want about him, whether he's playing as an individual or has his one eye on getting a move to another club or whatever. At this stage, frankly, I think as long as he's not having a negative impact on the team, as long as him playing in games isn't going to have a negative impact on how other players are playing, if he's able to come on and have that sort of spark and really sort of encourage us, then that's all that matters, I think.
Yeah, look, you're right. And I mean, you only had to look up the lineup against Preston to say, gee whiz, I think other than Dawson and Grzycki coming on as a sub, Myler, we know Myler's been around a long time, but let's face it, as much as Myler gives as much as he can, if he's commanding a starting 11 position, then we are going to have a problem. He's certainly a good player, but he's more of that, number 12, 13, 14 in a good squad. And I think it's just the fact that we've got so many players in there together that are new, with a new manager who, I don't know really what his tactical nous is on the training ground, but it's just going to be very frustrating until, I don't know, maybe the central hub of players, Dawson, midfield, just really start commanding the way that we're going to play themselves.
Yeah, and it's an interesting one when you consider just the fact that Slutsky's saying that we're essentially still in pre-season mode, that he's still trying to get his ideas across to the players. And I know that there's starting to be a few murmurs of criticism towards Slutsky himself. And I can't help but disagree with that to an extent, because I think when people say that he's clearly not a good manager, or he clearly doesn't know what he's doing, I think you only have to look at the fact that he's won titles with CSKA Moscow. And it's not like Marco Silva with Olympiacos where you say, my grandmother could manage them to the league title. I mean, they're struggling this season and they've already given up on hope of retaining their title. I think they're 13 or 15 points off the pace already. So you just have to look at that league to say, well, actually, for him to win the title within a couple of years in a row, get them into the Champions League, get them doing well there as well, he clearly knows something about how to manage a team, and he clearly knows something about bringing young players through, which is something that he was renowned for with CSK as well. So he has an intelligent brain in him, and he's not just a lackey of the Allens to sort of pin all of their shortcomings on. So I think it's quite unfair to really blame him for what's going on with the team at the moment. I think come December, if the team still plays like strangers, if the team still doesn't have any sort of organisation, then absolutely you say, look, you've had the personnel, they might not be your personnel, you might not have bought them, but you know who they are, you know what their strengths and weaknesses are. You should, by, let's say, October, November, probably December at the very latest, you should be able to get better out of them. But I think at the moment, expecting him to click his fingers, for first thing, I don't think he knows what his starting 11 is, because I don't think he knows quite yet how each player plays. So, for instance, Dicko I don't think can play up top on his own, which he's now starting to recognise. I think he's now recognised that Henriksen can't play as a deep-lying midfielder alongside someone like Larson. I think he knows that he needs to play a bit more advanced. Things like that, whether it's Aina playing as a wing-back or a winger rather than as a right-back because he's too exposed there, I don't know. Things like that, I think he's slowly starting to learn, and yes, he needs to start learning them a bit quicker, but it's a very difficult position that he's been put in, and I feel quite sorry for him, and I can only hope that we can start to sort of turn that corner, whether it's get a good win against Birmingham, win 2-3, 4-0, whatever it is, and suddenly get a bit of confidence flowing in the team. I don't know, but we just need something to really sort of jumpstart our season.
Yeah, look, and it could be as simple as, pinpointing one game, with backs against the wall against Birmingham this week, and I don't know, we pull one out of the box, win a couple of goals to nil, and all of a sudden we're like, see, we know what we can do.
Yeah.
And that's probably the disappointing thing. I mean, maybe now it highlights just how shithouse Bolton were, that we all thought after giving Bolton a pasting, right, we're in here, we're back on deck, this is all going to work nicely, players coming in, this is going to work well. I think we probably underestimated a little bit of just what's required to go back to that level. And a lot of these players that we've brought in, they've all got something to prove, but have they actually been part of a combined championship squad tilt at a title or promotion? And I think that's probably where the hole is. I don't think Slutsky's to blame at all. I mean, he's got to take it in part because he obviously picks his starting 11.
Yeah.
And he's still obviously trying to find that out. But I think basically the one thing that Steve Bruce used to get really criticised about was tactically they didn't really feel on the ground that he had much tactical nous. And there was games where obviously his solution to a lot of things was throwing 8 players up front and see how we go. And that works when you've got top quality defenders and top quality proven midfielders to be able to sit back and hold it. But I don't know, I sort of felt like Slutsky, especially against Preston, although we were, as I said, we were terrible at the start, he did make a change. Yeah. And that to me was something that I felt over the years Steve Bruce didn't do. Now, it's not to question what Steve Bruce did, but it's more to say, well, at least Slutsky identified a problem.
Absolutely. That's a really good point. Yeah.
And was prepared to do something about it. And who knows, as each week goes by and we can't really stomach any more losses in a row or bad results, he's obviously going to pick these things up and be able to form his little intel piece of how he's going to put his teams together.
And I think that's something that Slutsky and even Silver have had in common that Bruce didn't have, which I think you've picked up on well, which is you get that sense that if the game starts poorly, you know that the game isn't going to it's not lost at the first whistle when the teams run out and we start in a certain way, we're going to finish the game basically in that way, as you say, maybe with a few extra forwards on the pitch trying to chase the game. I mean, Slutsky will try and change things around, so he threw Grzycki on and that sort of changed the game. I think it was against, I can't remember, there was another game, I think it was against Villa, for instance, where we were absolutely getting hammered in that first half and then came out the second half almost an entirely different team, ironically against Steve Bruce. But yeah, it's a good point that it shows that to say that Slutsky doesn't know what he's doing is just to fly in the face of these facts that he does actually know how to turn a game around and maybe not win the game, like we didn't win against Preston, but we sure looked a hell of a lot better in that second half.
Yeah, look, and I agree, and I think as well, maybe he's the only thing that Slutsky's maybe guilty of is trying to stick with or play or understand a formation that may not actually suit the squad he's got. But he's still trying to find out who these players are and what they can do. So I don't blame him for it. But even this week, just looking at playing against Birmingham and who we've got and who we haven't got, I mean, with the cattle that we've got, I'd make some big changes and try and play like a 4-3-3. When we attack, we look like a championship side. We really do. We look like a good one. But I just feel like we've got to try and create more of that. And if defensive frailties are our problem, we've got to try and score more goals.
Yeah, we can do the Liverpool style of winning every game 4-3 rather than 1-0, I think. Which would be an interesting change from how we've been in the past. But just before we touch on that Birmingham game, you've talked about our attack and our attacking threats. And obviously the biggest one of those is Jarrod Bowen, who yesterday or this morning signed a new 3-year deal, which I've got to say One part of me is sort of saying, well, that was just entirely obvious, completely expected, not surprised from that point of view that it made sense from every angle, whether it's the owners getting more money out of him when they sell him, or the club having this decent forward actually locked down for multiple years, or from the fans' point of view of actually just enjoying watching him play this youth product who's actually able to score a couple of goals and locking him down for a few further years. But the other side of me says that I'm completely surprised by it because it's actually a common sense idea. It's a common sense thing to do. But we've seen with Josh Tyman in the past, and we've seen with other players in the past, that contracts have been wound down and not anything done about them. So great news with Bowen re-signing, and what do you make of it?
Well, look, my initial thought was surprise as well. And, you know, if anyone's listening to this and wants to record it and play it back to me, it's probably the only time that you'll hear me praise the Allams. But I am going to err on the side of positivity for once and actually say that I think Slutsky might have actually been sitting in the training room with his feet up on the desk looking at all the contracted players and what they're on and said, you know what, this kid deserves better.
Yep.
And he's gone and seen the Allams and said, give him some more money, please.
Yes.
And that's
yes.
it. And I hope to God I'm right, because that's what I'd like to have some faith in. But I don't know how much attention Slutsky pays to what players are getting paid, but that's my theory. I'm trying to be positive about it rather than thinking about the January window.
Yeah, that's
what the real cause might be.
That's the worry, yeah. I mean, look, I think January for me was always a concern with Bowen, that the Allams would try and cash in on him. And the only silver lining I can take out of that, if in the worst case scenario he does get sold in January, that at least with the 3-year deal we'll actually get, I don't know, 8 to 10 million for him potentially, rather than 500,000 or something. Which I know in the past the sales haven't always been completely reinvested into the squad, but you've got to look at it on the bright side of things. And if we do sell him, at least we're going to get a decent amount of money, and hopefully that means that we can sort of make some sort of replacements in the squad, rather than basically losing him like we lost Timon, where we basically lost him for free.
Yeah, exactly right. And look, again, I'm going to be positive, but shit, this is hard to say. In defence of the Allams, they wouldn't be prudent if they didn't try and lock him in for a longer period to boost his price up in case he wants to go.
Yeah.
And let's face it, he's setting the place on fire. He's quality. He's got to be on everyone's radar, not to mention the high-flying, big-spending Steve Bruce, who can handpick who he likes. Again, it's still hard to say. I don't know what the words are. But defensively, the Allams may actually be doing a good piece of business, even if it is to maximise return.
And that's why I always thought it was the most common sense outcome to see this announced at some point, because it made sense from their point of view and from ours. And it's good to see. And
hopefully, mate, just on that, it sends a bit of a rocket through the rest of the squad that the blokes that are putting in are getting rewarded.
Yeah.
And not just because he's scoring goals, but especially against Reading, he had a pretty flat period there for a while where, for a young man, he could have just sort of slumped his shoulders a bit and just got through the game. But the way he really adapted himself, and I felt showed how maybe even unfit Reading's back half were, he really, really showed what he was worth towards the end of that game. And I think that's why he's getting the goals. I think he's superiorly fit. He's really, really passionate about playing. And it sends the right message to the rest of the squad that those that are getting rewarded because of their effort.
And it's also a great message for the squad, because there was a little part of me that was surprised that he committed for 3 years, only from the point of view that the club as a whole looks to be in quite a bad way on the field, at least at the moment. So it's a good message for the squad if contracts are hopefully put to some other players, whether it's an extra year for Dawson or Myler, just to have some sort of squad stability. Instead of dismissing the contract offer out of hand, they can start to see, okay, some players are recommitting, not everyone's jumping ship. It might actually be a good thing to keep this core together and sort of have that solidarity for at least the next year or so. So I think it's good in that sense as well, because obviously in the last window we sort of saw one after the other jumping ship and leaving the club. that we've finally kind of turned it around a little bit, and we've got one player recommitting, signing on with the club, and hopefully the first of a few getting new contracts in the next couple of months.
Yeah, agree.
So we'll finish off with a bit of a chat about Birmingham on Saturday, and then I guess to start with, thinking of big kind of clashes in the past. It's another club. I can't really think of too many famous clashes in the past. I think we've probably just had a couple of games in the championship. Probably my favourite is, thinking about it now, I think we've coincidentally played them twice on my birthday in 2 different championship seasons on the 3rd of March, and I think it was the second one on my 21st birthday when we beat them 5-2. Might have been with Curtis Davies in the Birmingham team, funnily enough. I think that was when we were sort of scoring, huge amounts of goals with George Boyd, Ghetto, and maybe even Elmo sort of firing in that run-in right before we started choking and almost throwing it away. But that was probably my favourite memory of a game against Birmingham. Do you have any other games that come to mind?
No, not really. I do like the fact that we get to play another Birmingham-based team, because I think we do tend to lift when we do play a Birmingham-based team. But no, look, to be honest, the only thing I think of with Birmingham is obviously that Curtis Davies played there, and going back to the old Premier League days when they were there, from an Australian perspective, it was the only time we ever got to watch a game was when they were in the Premier League. But no, look, nothing that stands out to me other than I do think that. Again, I'm trying to be more positive today for once, but I actually think we'll beat Birmingham, and we're going to beat them pretty well. Yeah,
I mean, they had a really good result this morning against Sheffield Wednesday, which I could kind of attribute to a bit of bounce after sacking old Ari Redknapp the other day.
But
I tend to think the same, and it's not just the fact that we seem to be beating all of the teams starting with a B at home at the moment, with Burton and Bolton. But there is a bit of positivity, I think. They're a club that are struggling a little bit at this stage of the season as well, and I think at home it's the sort of division where clubs come to your ground and actually go for it. They don't just sort of set up shop. Everyone thinks they can beat everyone. So I think if they sort of play to attack us, hopefully that means we can exploit that. And if Grzycki's fit, Bowen's on the field, buoyed by this new contract, hopefully we can put a few past them.
Yeah, look, and looking at the lineup against Preston, obviously Grzycki coming in now, he's had his half an hour, 45 minutes, whatever it was. He should be right to play and start. And love him or hate him, we know that he's quality and he adds something. And I think if we've got a bit more of an attacking mindset, even if we do play a back three, I can see how playing the back three with Grzycki running around like a bit of a maniac just helps that ball from rebounding as quick, which doesn't catch us out. I mean, really, to be honest, being negative again, it is about not getting caught out at that back three. That's all it's going to be about. So if we're able to hold the ball a bit better up the pitch with a bit more quality, I can see us scoring an early one and maybe getting another early one while they're trying to get us on the bounce.
And you mentioned before that if you were in charge for this game, you'd be bringing in the changes. Who did you have in mind to bring into the team, and who was making way?
Well, not knowing exactly what his fitness is like, I don't even think Diamonde made the team sheet at Preston.
Yeah, that was interesting.
So I don't know what's going on there, but love him or hate him, when we're in the throes of Premier League squad of 12 or 13 last year, he was in it, playing up front with Hernandez, and was pretty serviceable. And I'm not saying that I think he's a standout player, but with him, I do like the idea of playing almost 4-3-3 with Bowen or Grzycki being one of the third strikers and letting Diamonde try and take a few of the central defenders away from Campbell, because quite clearly against Reading, Campbell was very, very keen to exploit them from wide channels, and it worked. And I think if Diamonde was playing and Campbell could be almost a bit of a second fiddle to some extent, I think it could really work. And let's face it, we've got to change it up a little bit. Against Preston, we were horrible. We didn't hold the ball up well enough at all going forward to allow our midfield to actually even get into position at times. And we've got to be able to get the ball held up. And as I like to say, Diamonde sticks his big butt out and holds that ball up pretty well. And Hernandez did say something, it might have been on Twitter or something. I remember this, after that game last year against Leicester, he said something somewhere about the fact that he enjoyed playing with his front forward players today or something like that.
Yeah.
There was some comment, and I think it's because Hernandez got to actually move about a bit. And Diamonde's he's no slouch, especially at this level. He should be actually trying to prove himself before January anyway.
And it's a bit amazing that he scored quite a tremendous goal against Bolton, I think it was. Yeah, I think it was the first goal against Bolton. That nice little backheel flick from the Grzycki cross quite early in the game. And I don't really think he's had a look in since then. I mean, I know we've signed Dicko, and there's always that hype that a new player is almost automatically meant to be better than anyone that you've got currently. And it's not to slate Dicko, because I do think he's shown promise. I think he's not a lone striker. I think that's his issue at the moment. But it's a bit unfortunate for Diamande that he hasn't really had a look in since we've signed Dicko, because I think he started to look quite good against Bolton. He finally scored a goal, so he had a bit of confidence, and he's just been knocked out of the team since then.
Exactly. And look, going back over the games, I still even go back to pre-season last year when we played, I can't remember who it was. It was one of the Italian teams. I think we played Torino.
Yeah.
And, even looking back at that game, he does quite a lot of work off the ball to get himself into a more defensive position. And I think going back to the start of that Premier League season, it's all right saying he's a striker or he's pushing forward, but I do remember him even getting a lot of ball out on the left wing and really giving us something. And I think probably the difference between him and Dicko is I don't see Dicko as anything but a good striker. I clearly see he's got good shot and he's good size and pace about him, but Diamande does seem like a guy who is prepared to really throw his body around and get back. And if we're playing a back three and we're worried about how fragile we are, having a striker who's also, let's say, leading the defence a bit for you on the rebound could be just what we need.
Well, it's going to be an interesting one, and it'll be interesting to see if he does ring in the changes. I think it is that sort of balance at the moment between getting a bit of continuity in the team and, as you say, also giving some of these fringe guys who've kind of been overlooked in the last couple of games. Funnily enough, it's a little bit like when Phelan finally got to make a few signings at the end of the summer window last season, and you saw Jakupovic and a few others dropped from the team, even though we actually got better results when they were in the team. And it was only when Jakupovic was reinstated in January under Silva that we really started to get a few results again. And the other one that will be interesting is Clark coming back into the team now that Kingsley's injured, and seeing how he goes at left back again, because he wasn't terrible at left back. I don't think he's a natural left back by any means, but I think he was solid enough that I'm not, sweating on the fact that he'll be our left back for the next couple of games at least. But it'll be interesting to see if he brings it.
You're right. We had a similar position last year with Myler, Myler having to move to left back. I think you hit it on the head, mate. We've got that many players in the squad that just need to have a look at the way Preston are set up. Yep. Right? There's no real superstars. And I still go back, probably one of the proudest moments as a club in recent times, besides obviously the FA Cup run, was to be able to sit there with that, tongue-in-cheek team photo before the Leicester game, and then go out and beat them with what everyone thought was, the worst squad assembled in Premier League history, which probably on numbers it was. And that unit, we then went and beat Swansea. We had guys in that team who were, they were really living the dream. It was all about trying to be the best footballer they could be. And sometimes, mate, that's what we've got to get back to. If there's a real desire to want to play, then let's give them the right crack to have a go.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, maybe all the players just need to have a listen to this podcast before the game on the weekend and get a bit fired up for the game.
Well, mate, I tell you what, if there was live coverage of them listening to it before the game, I think we're all in trouble. But I do think, mate, that we can get a bit overcomplicated with this stuff. And your prime example there was sometimes last year, Phelan chopped and changed and made all these massive changes. Go back to the year we got relegated with Steve Bruce, brought in all sorts at the transfer window. It doesn't work. You can't bring multiple players in and expect it to gel. We've seen West Ham basically turn their squad over twice in a year, besides a couple of key players, and they've struggled because of it as well. Whereas you look at Spurs now, and they're running the same squad for 3 or 4 years consistently. It doesn't matter what level you're at. If you keep the team together, they know how to play.
Absolutely, and I think that's a great positive note to finish on, because hopefully we can get that sort of consistency into the team and start with a great win against Birmingham. Just before we sign off, I'll get a tip from you for the game. I think you probably sounds like you're tipping a win. What do you reckon the score will be?
Yeah, we're going to bang in 3. We're going to win 3. We're going to win 3-1.
Good stuff.
And
I think you've been pretty good with your tips so far this season as well. So
look,
as well.
Lucky enough, I wasn't on the podcast last week, mate, because I would have been shithouse. But this week, I'm optimistic that Birmingham are going to come thinking we're a bunch of nuffies, and they're going to go all the way back to Birmingham land, drinking some sour fluids.
Brilliant. Good stuff. Well, thanks for joining me tonight, Brad.
Thanks for having me.
No worries, and thank you everyone for listening in. Hopefully we can get the 3 points against Birmingham. Come on, City! You've been listening to the official Hull City Australia podcast. For more discussion, join us on Facebook in the Hull City AFC Australian Supporters Group, or follow us on Twitter at Hull City AFC Oz. The music was created by Amber and Black.
There's no turning back 'cause you're amber.